The stars in the galaxy had been silent for thousands of years, as though they had forgotten the long-forgotten war that once scarred Earth. The Xaltheans, an empire that once set its sights on conquering humanity, had lost all interest in Earth after their humiliating defeat. No one, not even the brightest minds in the galaxy, had expected any kind of resistance from Earth again. For millennia, Earth had been lost to the galactic records, a place that no one thought could pose any threat. Yet, as the Xalthean fleet traveled toward the distant blue planet, a strange sense of unease began to creep over the commander, Xalthar. The Xaltheans were proud of their victory over countless civilizations. They were a fierce empire with advanced technology capable of wiping out whole planets. But Earth had been different. When they first attacked, they had underestimated the planet's resilience. The battle had been fierce, and in the end, the Xaltheans had been forced to retreat humiliated and broken. And just as quickly as the war had begun, Earth had disappeared from their radar, leaving the Xaltheans to believe that the planet had been wiped out in some final catastrophic event. But now, 3,000 years later, the Earth's location had been found again, and the old stories of their defeat seemed almost like fairy tales. The time for revenge had finally come. Xalthar stood at the command center of the flagship, his cold eyes fixed on the holographic map of the solar system. The Earth was still far off, but his fleet was closing in. He could almost feel the triumph in his bones, the victory that would wipe away the shame of that long-lost battle. His superior, General Thar, had issued a direct order: destroy Earth, once and for all. The Xaltheans had become complacent, assuming that Earth was a forgotten world of no importance. They had no idea what they were about to face. "Sir," a voice interrupted his thoughts. It was his communications officer standing nervously before him. "We are receiving a transmission from Earth." Xalthar raised an eyebrow, intrigued but not concerned. "Put it through," he ordered. The image flickered to life on the screen, revealing nothing but static. But then, a voice echoed across the vast space of the room. It was calm, steady, and eerie. "Welcome back to Earth," the voice said, its tone almost too casual. "Please stand by for consequences." A chill ran down Xalthar's spine. The voice was human, but it was not the voice of a people who had given up. It was the voice of someone who was waiting for them. For the first time in years, the Xalthean commander felt something unfamiliar uncertainty. His mind raced. What did that message mean? Who could possibly be controlling Earth after so many years? Could it be some sort of trap? But then, his thoughts were interrupted by the sudden appearance of a series of bright dots on the star map, dozens of ships emerging from behind Mars. His heart skipped a beat. "Sir," his officer shouted, panic rising in his voice. "We've been detected. They're coming at us." Xalthar's eyes widened. The Earthlings were awake, and they had sent their own fleet. But this was no ordinary fleet. These ships were unlike anything he had ever seen before. They were sleek, angular, and deadly looking. Their designs weren't just advanced, they were alien, almost as if they were made from technology older than the Xaltheans themselves. "Activate shields," Xalthar ordered, his calm facade slipping. He could feel the pressure building inside him as the crew scrambled to carry out his orders. But it was too late. Before the Xalthean fleet could react, the ships from Earth moved in with lightning speed. They didn't wait for a declaration of war, nor did they need to. The battle began with no warning as the first of Earth's ships fired without hesitation, sending shockwaves through the Xalthean fleet. The blasts were precise, overwhelming, and shockingly powerful. Every shot was a direct hit, each one disabling a ship with brutal efficiency. Xalthar's hands gripped the command chair, his knuckles white. "Return fire," he shouted, but the order seemed almost pointless. Their shields couldn't keep up with the barrage. The enemy ships were so fast, so accurate that the Xalthean ships couldn't even react in time. "What are they?" Xalthar muttered under his breath. These weren't just humans anymore. This was something else, something far more advanced. Earth had evolved in ways the Xaltheans had never even dreamed of. The Xaltheans tried to form a defensive perimeter, but it was clear that their technology was no match for Earth's. In mere minutes, half of their fleet had been disabled, and Veldar knew they were losing. But still, he couldn't understand it. Earth had vanished for 3,000 years. How had they rebuilt themselves? How had they turned the tables so dramatically? Then, just as quickly as the battle began, it stopped. The Earth ships pulled back, forming a silent blockade around the edges of the solar system. The message came again, this time even more direct: you've made your first mistake. Now, we'll show you the consequences. Veldar stood frozen, his thoughts swirling. His fleet was crippled, and Earth was no longer a planet to be underestimated. What had they unleashed? What was this human force that had stayed hidden for so long? The weight of their first defeat began to sink in, but the fear that followed was unlike anything he had ever experienced. This is impossible, Veldar whispered. He had come to claim victory, but now, it seemed, he had only awoken a sleeping giant, a giant that had been waiting for this moment for centuries. And in the stillness of space, as the stars twinkled in the distance, the Xaltheans realized something that would haunt them for the rest of their existence. Earth was no longer the forgotten planet. And humanity, it seemed, had never forgotten the war. The Xalthean fleet had barely regrouped before the true weight of the situation began to dawn on them. The Earth ships, which had appeared out of nowhere, seemed almost unstoppable. Veldar watched from the command center, his mind racing, struggling to comprehend the sheer power of the human forces they were facing. His once proud fleet had been crippled in moments. They had prepared for battle, but not for this. This was no ordinary enemy. The humans had been waiting. And now, they were not just defending their home, they were making a statement. "Sir," the communications officer stammered, her voice breaking the tense silence. "We've received another transmission from Earth. It's different this time." Veldar didn't need to ask what the transmission contained. The chill in the air, the weight of impending doom, it was all too familiar. The humans weren't just going to sit back and watch them leave. They were going to finish what had started so long ago. "Play it," Veldar ordered, his voice tight with frustration. The screen flickered to life, showing nothing but a dark, empty space. Then, suddenly, a deep, resonant voice echoed through the room, calm but commanding. "This is the Earth Defense Command. You are in violation of our space. You have entered without permission. You will leave immediately, or we will activate the Awakening Protocol." Veldar's eyes widened. Awakening Protocol? He had heard whispers about ancient Earth technology during his training, but he had always dismissed them as nothing more than myth. Now, he realized those myths were very real. He had no idea what this so-called protocol was, but he could feel the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. "What is the Awakening Protocol?" Veldar muttered under his breath, looking at his officers. None of them had any answers. They were just as clueless as he was. Before anyone could respond, the ship's sensors began to beep wildly. Red lights flashed across the room as alarms blared in every corner of the bridge. The Xalthean fleet, still in disarray from the first wave of Earth's ships, now found themselves facing something much more dangerous, something they couldn't even see. "Report," Veldar demanded, his mind racing. "We're detecting massive energy readings coming from Earth, sir," the sensor officer replied, eyes wide with fear. It's coming from the planet's surface. We've never seen anything like this before. Get me a visual," Veldar ordered. Now, the view on the screen shifted, showing Earth in the distance. At first, there was nothing out of the ordinary. The planet was beautiful, serene, its blue oceans and white clouds glowing under the distant light of the sun. But then, something changed. A faint ripple, like a wave in the fabric of space itself, rippled through the atmosphere. It wasn't visible in the traditional sense, but the sensors picked it up, an energy surge so powerful it felt like the very planet was alive. "What is that?" the officer asked, voice trembling. "I don't know," Veldar replied, his mind racing to make sense of the impossible. "But we're about to find out." Before they could react, the entire fleet shook violently as an invisible force slammed into their ships. The Xaltheans struggled to maintain control as their ships spun and groaned under the pressure. Every control panel flickered and dimmed as if the very energy systems had been drained. For a moment, it felt like the entire fleet was being pulled toward the planet. "What is happening?" Veldar shouted, his fists clenched. "Sir, the ships are being pulled by some kind of gravity field. It's unlike anything we've ever seen," the sensor officer reported, fear creeping into her voice. Veldar's heart pounded in his chest. The awakening protocol was no mere weapon, it was a force. A force that had the power to control not just their ships, but the very fabric of space itself. Earth was not merely defending itself, it was using the planet's own energy to manipulate the battlefield. Why did they wait so long? Veldar asked aloud, the words barely leaving his lips. Why didn't they use this before? "Sir," the officer at the communication station spoke up again, her voice shaky. I think they've been waiting for us." Veldar looked at her, his expression darkening. He didn't need to hear more. This had all been part of Earth's plan. The humans had been lying in wait, observing, building up their forces, their technology. And now, the entire galaxy was witnessing the results. "We need to retreat," Veldar said, though the words felt hollow. The fleet was already crippled, and the more they tried to fight back, the more the mysterious field seemed to drain their energy. Every weapon, every shield, every system they relied on was being weakened by Earth's mysterious force. But there was no retreating. As if to answer his thoughts, the communication officer spoke again, her voice barely audible. "Sir, we're receiving another message from Earth. It's not like before." Veldar stiffened. He couldn't understand it. Earth was supposed to be a simple target, an easy win after thousands of years of galactic conquest. Yet, here they were, trapped by something they couldn't explain, outmatched by a species they thought had been erased from history. "Play it," Veldar said, his voice barely a whisper. This time, the screen came to life with a message. The face of a human appeared, older than any person Veldar had seen, but with an undeniable air of authority. There was something ancient in the man's gaze, something that made Veldar feel like a child. "You've made a grave mistake." The man's voice was steady and calm, but the weight of his words hit like a hammer. "We are not the same people you faced before. You thought you could conquer us. You thought you could erase us. But you have forgotten one simple thing. We are humanity. We never forget. And when we awaken, we do so with everything we have." The man's gaze hardened. "You've activated the awakening protocol. But this is not a weapon. This is who we are. You've woken the giants, and now you will see the consequences." The transmission cut off, leaving Veldar staring at the blank screen, his mind spinning. The Xalthean Empire had conquered countless worlds, but this was different. This was not a simple battle, it was a reckoning. "Prepare for battle," Veldar ordered, his voice grim. "And ready the fleet to break through. Whatever they've activated, we need to stop it. Now." But deep inside, Veldar knew that the war was no longer about victory. It was about survival. Earth had awakened, and nothing in the galaxy could stand in its way. The Xalthean fleet, battered and bruised, continued to struggle against the overwhelming force that Earth had unleashed. Veldar sat in the command center, his eyes scanning the monitors, his mind trying to make sense of what was happening. The awakening protocol had shifted the balance of power entirely, and the Xaltheans were no longer in control of their own fate. They were at the mercy of a planet they had thought to crush. The realization hit him hard. Earth hadn't just been hiding for the past 3,000 years. It had been preparing. Outside the command center, the rest of the fleet was in chaos. Ships drifted aimlessly, their engines sputtering and failing. The mysterious force from Earth continued to pull at their systems, draining energy at a terrifying rate. Weapons were useless, shields flickered and died, and their once proud ships were reduced to helpless shells floating in space. There was no enemy fleet to fight, no battle cries to hear, only the sound of systems failing and the eerie silence that enveloped them. Veldar clenched his fists, his breath coming in shallow gasps. "Status report," he demanded, trying to keep his voice steady. "Sir," the sensor officer replied, looking up from his console. "We're being hit by a form of quantum interference. It's blocking our ability to communicate with the rest of the fleet. We're cut off. Cut off? Velthar repeated, his voice rising. We were just engaged in battle. There has to be something we can do. The officer shook her head slowly. We've tried everything, sir. It's as if Earth is controlling every aspect of our fleet, even our most basic functions. We can't move, we can't communicate, and we can't fight back. The room fell silent. It wasn't fear that filled the air, it was disbelief. The Xaltheans had faced enemies before, powerful and cunning, but this was something entirely different. There was no grand army charging at them, no overwhelming firepower being unleashed. This was a battle fought in silence, in the very fabric of space itself. Veldar's mind raced. He had been trained for war, for direct combat. This, however, was a war that didn't need soldiers, doesn't need blasters or bombshells. It was a war fought in the void of space with something far more ancient and mysterious, something that had been hidden from the galaxy for millennia. In a moment of frustration, Velthar slammed his fist against the armrest of his chair. What have we awakened? He muttered to himself. Then, a voice calm, controlled, and chilling came over the comms. It wasn't an attack. It wasn't even a threat. It was a statement. We don't fight the way you do, Xalthean. Veldar's eyes snapped to the screen. The voice, once again, came from Earth, this time from an unrecognizable source. The human who spoke seemed ancient, wise, as if they had seen and experienced more than anyone else in the galaxy. The screen flickered for a moment before showing a holographic image of the human tall, with piercing eyes that seemed to see through Velthar and beyond. We've learned, the human continued. We've learned that the true strength lies in the silence, in the patience, and in the long wait. You think we've been hiding, but we've been waiting. Veldar's heart pounded. He could hear the faint hum of the systems failing around him. It wasn't a fight, it was a test, a trial that the humans had set up for them. A trial of endurance. A trial of patience. A trial that Velthar and his fleet were losing. The human's face didn't change, but the words they spoke were like a hammer on a fragile glass. The time for violence has passed. Now, the only thing that remains is the reckoning. Velthar swallowed hard, feeling an unfamiliar knot in his stomach. They weren't being attacked. They weren't even being destroyed. Earth was simply rewriting the rules of war. It was as if they had taken the very concept of conflict and bent it to their will. The Xaltheans, once proud conquerors of countless worlds, were now faced with something they had never encountered before, a force of nature. A force that didn't need to fight back because it controlled everything. We can't win this, the communications officer said, her voice barely a whisper. Velthar didn't respond. He couldn't. The silence was deafening. He had been trained to lead in battles where strength and firepower were the key to victory. But now, he was realizing that this was something different. Earth was showing them that war didn't need to be loud, it didn't need to be explosive, it just needed to be inevitable. And right now, it felt inevitable. The Xalthean fleet continued to struggle in silence. The battle wasn't over, but it was slipping away, and no one knew how to stop it. The energy from Earth's mysterious force wasn't just disabling their ships, it was rewriting their understanding of warfare itself. And there was nothing they could do to fight it. Velthar knew what he had to do next, but the thought of it terrified him. If Earth could control the battlefield this way, if they could manipulate the very fabric of space to their will, then maybe, just maybe, it was time to surrender. But surrender to whom? To what? The humans? A species they had once thought of as nothing more than a fleeting enemy? The thought seemed absurd. And yet, in the silence, he couldn't deny the weight of the truth. The war was already over. It had been rewritten before it even began. The Xaltheans were being shown a new way of thinking, one where violence and power were no longer the measures of strength. In the vastness of space, it was not the strongest who won. The one who knew how to wait. Velthar stood up suddenly, his mind still racing, his thoughts tumbling over each other. He could hear the hum of the ship, the faint sound of systems malfunctioning, the quiet that seemed to seep into every corner of the command center. It was all a reminder there was nothing left to fight. Earth had won, not with weapons, but with patience and mastery over the unseen forces that govern the universe. He stared at the view of the Earth, now looming large on the screens. There was no more anger in his chest, no more need for vengeance. Only a sense of overwhelming defeat. The silence of space had rewritten the war. And Xalthar, the once proud commander, was now left with only one question. Could he, or anyone, truly fight against what humanity had become? The answer, he realized, was no. Earth had won not with power, not with noise, but with something far more terrifying. With silence. The Xalthean fleet was no more than a collection of derelict ships, drifting aimlessly through the void, their once proud engines silent and useless. Xalthar sat alone in the command center, his mind racing as he tried to make sense of what had just transpired. The hum of the failing systems around him was the only sound in the room, punctuated only by the occasional room, her face grim. "Sir," she said quietly, "the fleet is in disarray. We have no power, no communication. The Xalthean Empire is gone." Xalthar nodded, though the words cut him like a blade. "It's not just us, is it?" he asked softly, his voice hollow. She shook her head. "No, sir. All across the galaxy, fleets have been reporting strange occurrences. Energy fields blocking communications, ships drifting without power, systems failing. It's as if the archive is spreading, as if Earth is reaching into the very core of the galaxy and rewriting everything." Xalthar looked at her, his eyes tired but burning with a new understanding. "It's not just us they've defeated, is it?" "No," she whispered, her voice heavy with the weight of the truth. "It's the entire galaxy. Earth has found a way to control the past, to control history. The archive. It's not just a collection of memories. It's a force that can reshape the galaxy." The words hung in the air between them like an unbearable weight. Xalthar's mind raced. The archive had not just defeated them. It had already begun to unravel everything they had ever known. The power of memory, the power to erase, to rewrite, to reshape the past, was something far beyond what any empire, any civilization, could ever comprehend. For the first time, Xalthar felt the true scale of Earth's victory. They hadn't just beaten the Xaltheans. They had silenced the galaxy. And in that silence, something far more dangerous was beginning to take shape. "Do you know what this means?" Xalthar asked, turning toward his officer, his voice low and almost afraid. She shook her head. "I don't think we can understand it yet, sir." The stars outside the viewport seemed distant now, as if they had lost their glow, their promise. The universe, once alive with possibility, now felt like a graveyard. Xalthar's mind flashed to the memories of all the species he had conquered, the civilizations he had destroyed in his rise to power. Now, it seemed, all those actions had been for nothing. The archive had recorded it all, and in its silent, unyielding judgment, it had written them out of history. But there was one thing Xalthar couldn't shake. One thing that lingered in the back of his mind like a haunting whisper. Earth had not destroyed the galaxy, it had rewritten it. And with that power, Earth had become the ultimate judge, the ultimate force in the universe. The Xaltheans had fallen, but what about the others? What about the countless other empires, the endless histories that had been written in blood and fire? And what of the future? Could Earth decide who would rise and who would fall? Could it shape the galaxy to its own will, erasing any trace of those who dared challenge it? Xalthar took a slow breath, his eyes narrowing as a new resolve began to form within him. The silence that had once felt like defeat now seemed like an opportunity. An opportunity to learn, to understand. Earth had shown them its power, but what if there was more to this archive than just judgment? What if it held the answers to everything, every question, every secret, every piece of knowledge the universe had to offer? "What will you do, sir?" his officer asked, her voice hesitant. Xalthar didn't answer immediately. He turned his gaze back to the stars, to the flickering lights of distant planets, to the silent emptiness that seemed to stretch on forever. The weight of their situation pressed down on him, but there was still something in him that refused to give up. He wasn't just going to let Earth decide the fate of the galaxy. "There's more to the archive," he said finally, his voice firm. "We've only seen the beginning. It has the power to rewrite the past, but what if it can rewrite the future as well? We need to understand it, learn from it, and if possible, find a way to use its power. Not to destroy, but to rebuild." His officer looked at him, uncertainty in her eyes. "Rebuild? After everything that's happened?" Xalthar nodded slowly. "Yes. We may have lost, but this is not the end. Not yet. The galaxy is vast, and there are still ways to fight back. Earth's victory is not complete. We will find a way to turn the archive's power to our advantage." But as Xalthar spoke those words, he couldn't shake the feeling that Earth's victory was far more final than he was willing to admit. The stars outside the viewport flickered again, and for a moment it felt as though the universe itself had gone silent. The hum of the ship's failing systems, the voices of the crew, the chaos of the Xalthean Empire, all had been swallowed up by the silence. And Xalthar realized then that Earth had not just defeated them. It had silenced them. And in that silence, the galaxy was no longer the same. The future, once full of possibilities, now felt like a quiet, endless wait. A wait for something, someone to rise from the ashes. But what would remain when the silence finally broke? Only time would tell.